Welcome back to the D3 Datacast. We've taken a little bit of time for our Christmas break, but we're back here to cover a half week and then the first week of January before we get back on our regular Monday schedule on January 9th. Thanks for sticking with us as we delayed this episode a little bit, but with no games, it didn't make sense to push out an episode. But we've got one last hurrah here for non-conference action, and then we're going to be getting hot and heavy into conference play. So today we're going to take a look at some of the tightest conference races as we head towards the end of the regular season. So Matt, we did have a chance to take a little break here, and how did that go for you?
I didn't quite know what to do with myself after all of this D3 basketball we've had for November and most of December, having 5 full days off with really no D3 games to speak of. We had one D1 exhibition in there. It felt weird. I didn't know what to do with my afternoons and evenings. I don't know how it went for you.
Yeah, not bad. But as I was seeing on Twitter, it looked like there was maybe a few people who didn't know what to do with their Monday who have gotten used to watching our show on Mondays. And we know that that led to a little bit of harassment of our family members. So hopefully now that we're back, that kind of ugliness can stop and we can just focus back on the basketball. Right, Matt?
Yeah, we were trying to enjoy a nice family day, and our parents were being harassed on Twitter by people wanting to know when the next D3 Datacast episode was coming. But we can't blame the people. We got to give the people what they want. And so we're back with another episode here.
That's right. We mentioned in the previous episode, it's the season of giving. We give you the D3 basketball content. You give us a little click of that subscribe button. We'll keep the train rolling. And as we mentioned, we wanted to take a look here as we're really getting close to what's going to be consuming the Division III basketball calendar, and that's the division races. So Matt, we took your efficiency ratings, crunched some numbers to find the tightest conference races, and we define that by looking at the difference in overall efficiency margin between the number 1 team in the conference and the number 2 team in the conference. Now, I know some leagues have already started conference play, and that will certainly have an impact already on the race for the regular season title. But for our purposes, we're not so concerned about that because ultimately, in our theory, the best team is the one that will emerge with the Pool A bid. Now, the only caveat to that is the UAA does reward the regular season champion with the Pool A from that conference because they have no conference tournament. However, we're not at a disadvantage there because the UAA is one of the conferences that has not started any conference play. So just that, hopefully that kind of sets up what we're going to be looking at here as we get into the top 5 tightest conference races, starting off with number 5. It's the OAC, where we have Mount Union as the favorite with an overall adjusted efficiency margin of 23.6. John Carroll coming in number 2 at 22.8. So you can see a difference in efficiency margin of just 0.8. And then on these slides, we're also adding the third team just to give a little bit of context about what may be behind that, although for the purposes of sorting this list, we're just looking at the difference in efficiency margin between the top ranked team in the conference and the second ranked team in the conference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just to further contextualize these numbers for people, you can roughly say 5 points of efficiency margin is the difference kind of between a team in the top 5 and a team in the top 15, and then 15 to maybe 30, and then 30 to 50 and 50 to 100. So that's about, each of those steps is roughly speaking about 5 points of efficiency margin. Here in the OAC, you can see Mount Union and John Carroll are less than 1 point of efficiency margin. And this is the 5th tightest race. So we're going to see some really some tight, narrow gaps between the top team and the second rated team in a conference. Again, maybe it's going to make some really great conference tournaments at the end of the season. But right here with the OAC, I'm sorry, it's a great conference. We know Mount Union and John Carroll are both in the top 10, I think, in the D3hoops.com poll. Heidelberg's also in the top 25. The computer's not quite as high on Heidelberg as the voters are, but this is going to be a great race. Obviously, they made the list. So, yeah, seeing Mount Union and John Carroll probably being the top 2, battling that out for the regular season race. And then in the OAC tournament, the 2 teams to watch out for here.
Yep, and then not showing up because we didn't go to 4 teams. Marietta is also right there, not too far behind Heidelberg. So this will be an interesting race all around, but looking very tight at the top there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Region 7, which the OAC is in Region 7, It's going to be a very difficult region to get ranked in the regional rankings, but definitely Mount Union and John Carroll, if they have a strong conference season here, will be in that mix. If one of them wins the Pool A, I would think it's likely that the other would be in a good position for Pool C. And if there's an upset in the OAC here, then maybe both of them could be in Pool C position, depending on how the conference play plays out for them.
Moving on to number 4 on the list is one that you talked a lot about when we did our Pool C fantasy draft a couple of weeks ago, and that's the NJAC. Montclair State leading the way there at a 21.4 adjusted efficiency margin, with Kane at 20.8 coming in number 2 for a difference of just 0.6. And then this is notable with Rowan at number 3, because this is really the tightest top 3 that we're going to see in our lists. Rowan at a 17.9 overall efficiency margin, just 3.5 points behind Montclair State.
Yeah, definitely interesting on the top 3 here. If we sorted this by the tightest races being the top 3 teams, this would be the number 1 tightest conference in Division 3. I think maybe tied or slightly above the UAA. Both of them have a top 3 that are really, really close. And another interesting thing here about the NJAC, I think it's Stockton that's in the top 25 by the D3Hoops.com voters. The computer has them 4th. They're actually just off this list. Montclair State, Kane, and Rowan are the top 3 by the computer. So Stockton is also just right up there with them. This is really a 4-team race in the NJAC. Wouldn't really surprise me if any of those 4 teams takes the Pool A at the end of the NJAC tournament. We're looking, obviously in February for that kind of a thing. But these other teams could be in the mix for Pool C as well. Like we kind of looked at our crystal ball in that Pool C draft episode. Check that one out a few weeks back if you haven't seen it. We tried to forecast our silly guesses about who might make the NCAA tournament. And the NJAC isn't a conference that gets a lot of national attention about being an elite conference. There may be a second tier conference just maybe flirting with that top 10 type spot. But they're, I think, in a good position to maybe get probably definitely 2, maybe 3 teams into the NCAA tournament this year. So we could be looking at 2 Pool C bids from the NJAC. It's going to be a heck of a race for the entire conference season. And once we get to that tournament, it's going to be a doozy, I think.
Yeah, the NJAC wasn't in our top 10 conferences list that we put out before the season started, but there's one that's definitely in that 10 to 15 range. And then depending on the year, could challenge to move into that bottom part of the top 10.
Yeah, if we did an update episode, or if we do one at the end of the season, kind of looking back at who are the top 10 conferences this season, I have a suspicion the NJAC would sneak into that top 10 and be kind of in that second tier range of conference. Yep. Maybe kicking our MIAA out of the top 10 and putting themselves in.
Yeah, depth of conference is so important in something like that. And in here, you could easily go 4 deep, even though we're only showing 3 here. Yeah,
and it's going to be an interesting theme for these conference races. Just interesting how it turned out. We have a range of conferences. The OAC, a little bit stronger than the NJAC overall, maybe not in that top upper echelon, but maybe right up against that upper tier. The NJAC, maybe a step back, and we'll see, another conference later on that is even a tier or 2 below the NJAC, I think, as a conference.
All right, you ready to move on to number 3 on the list, Matt?
Yeah, let's take a look at number 3, the CCIW. So here we have, by the computer, Wheaton plus 25, North Park right behind them plus 24.5. That's just a 0.5, a half a point of efficiency margin difference between those two. Elmhurst is number 3 by the computers. Again, CCIW is a strong and deep conference up in that top tier of conferences. You can see that plus 25 rating for Wheaton and North Park kind of puts them in the top 15 range by the computer. And there's good teams that aren't on this list. Kind of like we said, Stockton missing the list on the NJAC. There's Illinois Wesleyan that would be pretty close. There is North Central that would be pretty close. I feel like I'm probably missing someone else off the top of my head as well. But the CCIW, of course, looks strong again. Doesn't have a top 5 contender as we stand right now, but it's going to be a battle as always. And a couple of these teams are hopefully going to be in the top 25 all season long, unless they just slaughter each other and the voters keep them just out. But yeah, it's a good league, and it's going to be a tight race.
Yeah, I know the problem for top 25 voters has been historically you can count on the CCIW having 2 to 3 top 25 caliber teams, and that's definitely the case this year. It's just a matter of picking out which out of a group of 5 or 6 are the 2 or 3.
Yeah, early on I had Elmhurst, and I had them and quite high after maybe the first week or two. But then since then, I think it's been just Wheaton that I voted in my top 25. And I'm going to say the next ballot that comes out, I will be likely voting for North Park as well, strongly considering them. I don't know their schedule off the top of my head unless they have some questionable results in the intermediate times. But North Park has looked very good, surprisingly good to me.
Yeah, you can always count on the CCIW for a really good and interesting conference race, and no surprise to see them showing up high on the list here.
Yeah.
So moving on to number 2 is the Liberty League. Here we have Hobart in the number 1 spot at 19.2 overall adjusted efficiency margin, with RPI right behind them, a difference of just 0.4. And then also, just for some added context here, Ithaca, it checks in at number 3 in the Liberty, 9.6 efficiency margin points behind leader Hobart.
Yeah, interesting gap here between 2 and 3, different from the last 2 slides that we've seen. This would not be a very tight conference race if we defined it as the top 3 teams, but Hobart and RPI right there, they're teams that are kind of flirting with the top 25 in my mind, maybe just outside by the computer, maybe in more of that 30 to 40 range. But if any of these teams make a run, they could definitely end up in the top 25, in my top 25 ballot, I should say. But yeah, this is a league that could see 2 teams into the NCAA tournament. Theoretically, it's maybe more like the NJAC. It's on that second tier of conferences, maybe outside of that top 10 conference tier list. But this is going to be a great league. We've seen Hobart get a good win or two. Also have taken some teams to the brink. I think they're a good team. RPI was in my top 25 to start the season. They kind of dropped out. They're kind of been right on my watch list the whole year. Another good team. Similarly, Hobart has been on my watch list. So this is going to be a great one to watch in the Liberty League. I think it's going to come. The regular season race is going to come all the way down through February, and then to watch in the tournament, this is going to be, could we get a Pool C bubble burst out of this conference if the wrong team, wins the Pool A at the end and someone else is on the cusp? But this is going to be a fight, and that tournament's going to be a doozy here, assuming that Hobart and RPI make it through and don't get upset somewhere along the way.
Which brings us to number 1. Our tightest conference race is the Skyline. At this point, Farmingdale State comes in number 1. A little bit different set of numbers here, Matt. And yeah. Whereas the other 4 on the list, you either have strong Pool C contenders, or at this point in the season, we can talk ourselves into there being a Pool C contender. This is a different situation where at this point, the Skyline looks like a pretty clear 1-bid league, which makes securing that Pool A all the more important. There is no backup plan here, right?
Yeah.
So Farmingdale State comes in at the tops for the Skyline, but an efficiency margin of -1.1. Yeshiva -1.4 in number 2, 0.3 efficiency margin points behind Farmingdale State. And then actually not too far behind is Manhattanville at a -6 adjusted efficiency margin, 4.9 efficiency margin points behind Farmingdale State.
Yeah, this would be a fairly tight 3-team race if we defined it that way. But yeah, those 2, tight enough as it is, Farmingdale State, Yeshiva, they've had a little bit of a back and forth in that conference for the last couple of years, even though Yeshiva has had the national attention. Farmingdale has given them fits. They already beat them this year. One game, I believe that was at Yeshiva even. And if memory serves, Farmingdale was able to beat them at least once last year as well. So both those teams definitely gunning for the Pool A. There's no Pool C from the Skyline at this point. So it's going to be a 1-bid league. And yeah, interesting to see even the shape of those teams. Farmingdale State, the offense hasn't been great, but they've had a pretty good defense, a little bit of above average defense. So even though overall they're maybe just a tick below average in D3 by the computer, they're still, they have a good defense. It's been the offense that hasn't quite kept up. Yeshiva, just the opposite. They can score points. They don't have a problem offensively, but their defense has let them down at times. And so just a really interesting mix at the top of the Skyline here. 2 different teams, but overall similar in quality. that are going to be battling back and forth. In the regular season race, I think Farmingdale's 3-0. Yeshiva already has a couple of losses, although they've played a bunch more games in conference already. I think their schedule's front-loaded. I don't know if that has to do with how the conference schedules and Saturday games and the like, but they've played a lot more conference games than anyone already, and I think they're maybe 6-2. Farmingdale State has not lost yet. So the regular season race looks like it may be advantage Farmingdale at this point. I think they're going to still play at least one more time. But like you said in the intro, a lot of these races are going to come down to the conference tournament as far as the Pool A bid goes. So the regular season is going to be for home court advantage. It's going to be for building a Pool C resume for a lot of these conferences, but not the Skyline. So it's going to come down to that conference tournament. And Farmingdale State Yeshiva looks like it's going to be the battle here. But, maybe someone like Manhattanville sneaks in there as well.
Probably also worth pointing out here as people may be referencing your regional ranking data in that process. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you take the top team by efficiency margin in a conference, and at this point you are assigning them the Pool A, and then the Pool C consideration sorts out behind that, correct?
Yeah, I believe it. When there are conference standings, I take the leader in the conference standings and I designate them as the Pool A of the moment. So now that we have some results for a lot of these conferences, otherwise it was more of the top team by the ratings that was getting the advantage. Or I think if there's a tie, it breaks the tie that way. So I think right now it's listing Farmingdale as the Pool A, because if you go to d3hoops.com, they're at the top of the standings. They're 3-0. So that 1,000 winning percentage will give them the signified Pool A out of the conference for now.
But they do also have the top adjusted efficiency margin in the conference here. So
Yep.
Now with over 40 conferences, looking at a top 5 may not be totally satisfactory for everyone. I'm sure people are watching and they're saying, well, what about this conference or that conference? And we're not going to take the time to cover them all, but we did pick out a few other notables to go over. If you want to continue the ranking process like we did through the top 5, checking in at number 10 is the WIAC, where currently UW La Crosse is the top team by efficiency margin there. 1.6 efficiency margin points behind La Crosse is Oshkosh. And again, the WIAC is also another deep league. There will be teams besides these two that have the opportunity to have plenty to say about what happens in the WIAC, but at the top two, as we're sorting out the toughest races at the top, it's La Crosse and Oshkosh for the WIAC. Do you have anything to add on the WIAC?
Yeah, I just had to stealthily open my calculator app just to remind myself of, this. We're looking at some of these margins here, and these are efficiency margins, so sometimes it's a little bit difficult to translate to what does that actually mean, right? So how it would turn out, the average game would be about 75 possessions. So a 4-point efficiency margin difference would be a 3-point expected victory on a neutral court, roughly speaking. So that would be a 1-possession game for a 4-point efficiency margin difference. So 1.6 points here for the WIAC at number 10, the 10th tightest conference in all of Division III. That would be something like a 1.5 point expected win for La Crosse on a neutral court. So for most of these conferences, we're going to be talking about a 1-possession expectation as far as how tight a game would be between two teams, or at least for when we're in like the top 20 conferences. So usually conferences have a number 1 and a number 2 that will play competitive basketball with each other. That's just kind of how things work. But just kind of to recontextualize things, about a 4-point margin would still be within the range of a 1-possession game, and 1.6 here would be about a point or a point and a half. So we're still a really tight race between La Crosse and Oshkosh. Both of these teams at different points in the year were maybe expected to be a number 1 or number 2 type team, and they've slipped a little bit. So maybe, and in the WIAC overall, we came into the year, they were kind of the king of our conferences. We voted them number 1 in our top 10 conference list, and I think we would not say that they are right now, but they're probably number 2 or maybe number 3 in Division III. So still like one of the best conferences, still in that top tier we would talk about, and still going to be a really good race here between La Crosse and Oshkosh. And there's a couple of other teams, Whitewater, Eau Claire, Platteville could win some games against these teams in both the regular season and in the tournament. So yeah, we talk about depth of conferences all the time about making it quality. The WIAC is definitely there. but it's going to look like La Crosse and Oshkosh as the two teams as we enter into the conference season in earnest here in January.
And speaking of depth of conference, next on the list is the UAA, which checks in at number 14 if we rank the difference in efficiency margin between the top team and the second team. Emory, a plus 27.4 adjusted efficiency margin in the top spot there, with actually NYU, which may be a surprise to some people, number 2 there at 24.6 for a difference of 2.8 efficiency margin points.
Yeah, the computers are really high on NYU. So far, the human voters have not given them that benefit of the doubt. Their schedule has been pretty soft so far. That's about to change. We're going to maybe talk about that a little bit later. I think they have not yet played someone within the Massey top 100. So the computer is giving them a lot of credit for beating up rather soundly on bad competition. So right now they're in the top or the second slot in the UAA by the computer, but Rochester would be right there. We mentioned this earlier, I think, but if we ran this by the top 3 teams, the UAA would be tied for the number 1 tightest conference, with Rochester being thrown in the mix. Case Western Reserve, I think, is the 4th rated team by the computers in that conference. And yeah, if we ran it by the top 4 teams, they would be, a top 10 conference as well for the gap between the number 1 and the number 4 teams. So it's going to be really interested to see how the UAA comes out. Number 14 is a little bit of a surprise based on how good all of these teams are. Top to bottom, I think I just looked up, even now Chicago, the bottom rated team by the Massey ratings, they're still a top 100 team now. So all 8, I believe, UAA teams are rated in the top 100 by the Massey system. I don't quite know where they're rated by my system offhand, but again, that depth of conference is going to be great. I think almost anyone in the conference is going to be able to lose to almost anyone in the conference on a weekly basis. And this is the only league, that has a Pool A bid that isn't going to be able to award it for a tournament. So all of these conference games are going to matter, and they're all coming up in January or starting in January. So UAA is definitely going to be a good one to watch. I think they play Friday nights and Sundays during the season. So yeah, those are always fun games to tune into because they're always a battle. And they're always good teams.
Yeah, the UAA coming in at number 14 on this list, I think it maybe is a surprise, but really it's a credit to Emory being able to kind of put a little bit of cushion between them and the rest of the league, because the whole league really has been as advertised so far this season. I don't think there's any complaints about them as a whole. And if we were ranking the conferences right now, they would be a very strong contender for number 1. Yeah. So really, this is a credit to Emory. You see some big numbers there in overall adjusted efficiency margin, and that they've been able to, kind of come ahead of the pack really speaks to what they've done so far.
And again, this conference will be a great one to watch week in and week out. It's going to give the voters a lot of information. Right now, the human voters like Rochester on top of that conference. The computers think it's Emory. It's all going to get sorted out, and seeing a few of these matchups, seeing NYU actually play someone for once is going to help sort a lot of things out. Are they this good? Are they going to drop down to maybe 4th or 5th or 6th in this conference? That's kind of maybe more what we thought they were going to be coming into the year. But they look really good. So who knows? I'm excited to watch UAA.
Another household name that we wanted to get in here, number 19 on the list, is the ODAC. Another one where probably it's a credit to the team at the top. Randolph-Macon is a plus 31.8, which I believe is number 2 overall. And Hampton-Sydney, 27.9, number 2 there for a difference of 3.9 efficiency margin points. Randolph-Macon started the year as the number 1 in the top 25 poll, had that early stumble to Mary Washington. But with what they've done since, and then some other turmoil at the top, they have put themselves back in consideration for the top spot in future polls.
Yeah, I was right there with you. I was very surprised to see the ODAC check in at number 19 here with teams we've seen. Randolph-Macon, start at the top and then fall down a little bit. Hampton-Sydney had a great upset win coming into this week. The computer has really liked them. Guilford has been getting top 25 votes. Roanoke has been getting top 25 votes. And the computer really likes those two teams. The computer sees Guilford as a top 25 team and sees Roanoke either as a top 25 team or just right knocking on the door of the top 25. So that's maybe 4 teams in the mix there, not even mentioning Virginia Wesleyan, who's also just outside that. But like you said, this is a credit to Randolph-Macon after they took that, what was it, triple overtime win against Hood,
Yeah.
maybe, and then they took the loss to Mary
At
Washington
at Mary
at
Washington.
Mary Washington. So they took a little bit of a hit in the voters' minds. But when I was doing my last ballot, I was looking back at Randolph-Macon in the top five and said, "Man, they're right there in the mix again." I don't think they're number one for me. I don't. But they've steadied themselves and climbed up. And for Randolph-Macon, this plus 31.8, I should clarify, that doesn't contain any preseason expectation for them. This is all Randolph-Macon's in season performance. So where we are in the season, for those who have been following my efficiency ratings, any team right now who has played at least 8 games, I'm giving them full credit for in-season performance. If they've played less than 8 games, I'm still pulling in, a 1/8 or whatever, let's say, preseason expectation. But yeah, this is mostly in-season results now, folks. So Randolph-Macon, we're not looking at what Buzz Anthony did anymore. We're looking at what the current guys have done. So they've quietly put together a nice season. Hampton-Sydney, we saw those two teams play, and that was a 2-point Randolph-Macon win. At the time, we thought maybe that was another sign that Randolph-Macon was still trying to find themselves, and maybe it was. But since then, Hampton-Sydney has put together some great work as well. So the ODAC is shaping up to be a great one, great battle. Like I said, Guilford, Roanoke, Virginia Wesleyan, these other teams also in the mix here. So it's going to be a great league, has great depth. Going to be a fun one.
That brings us to our last conference of note, and we can no longer use the tight
No.
descriptive here, because checking in number 45 out of 45 is the GNAC. And we're not highlighting this one just because it's the widest gap, but it's also of note nationally because St. Joseph has been one of the real revelations of the early season here. The new number one, they've been very impressive. They've already completed the toughest part of their schedule, getting into GNAC play now.
Yeah.
The expectation, I think, has to be that they run the table here, at least through conference play. St. Joseph plus 33.9 adjusted efficiency margin is number one overall in your efficiency margins. Number 2 in the GNAC is Emmanuel plus 7.3, so not a bad number. The only problem is the gap here is from number 1 overall to number 124 overall. So an overall efficiency margin difference of 26.6 points here.
Yeah, that's a big one. Like you said, Emmanuel, not a bad team. They would probably be just outside the top 100, I think. They'd be, we looked it up, it would be a 120 or something like that.
Yep.
A 124. St. Joseph, number 1. So that's a big gap. That would be, what would that be? That would be like a 18 or something point expected victory margin for St. Joseph on a neutral court. We expect St. Joseph to run the table. One loss you'd have to decide if that was acceptable or disappointing. If they had one loss in the GNAC, I think that'd probably be disappointing. They still have one tough matchup left, WPI in the non-conference on December 30th. So that's coming up this week. After that, like we see on the screen here, no one's going to be in their league. And this is why during our Pool C draft episode, we said we're not going to consider St. Joseph, Connecticut for this ranking. And this is exactly why. If they don't win the Pool A, that would be a very big disappointment for them. They're going to be big favorites in that tournament, expecting them to probably host the tournament if that's what the GNAC's format is. At least the title game probably is going to be at their home court, assuming they can make it there. And this is just, it's not going to be a race. I don't think. St. Joseph, they look every bit of a number 1 team. And the GNAC outside of them has not traditionally been a powerhouse. And so we see here 26-point efficiency margin gap. Emmanuel, they'd be leading the Skyline based on what we saw before, but unfortunately, this is not the Skyline. It's the GNAC.
And we've seen high winning percentage teams out of the GNAC that need a Pool C.
Yeah.
And traditionally, they've not had the strength of schedule to be able to get themselves over the hump. Now, with how head and shoulders above the rest of the league it appears that St. Joseph is, you wouldn't expect that they would need that. But they're a little bit they're definitely, I think, a different situation than what we've seen out of those kind of teams
Yeah,
in the
Albertus
GNAC. Well,
Magnus and
right.
Johnson and Wales have had a couple of those years. But St.
Already they
Joseph would be in a
yeah,
position for Pool C, I think.
right. And then what I was going to just go back to their non-conference, they've already got wins over Yeshiva, Babson, Wisconsin Oshkosh, Illinois Wesleyan, Tufts.
Yeah. Yeah, you
And then, like you said, you mentioned the WPI game still upcoming, so another chance to get into the win. So it's one where even if they have a high winning percentage, low SOS, they've played a great schedule so far. But the reality is, as they've add the rest of GNAC play onto it, it's going to be an anchor
Oh
on
yeah.
that SOS. So we'll see
Yeah.
where it actually finishes up. But what would be different for their resume versus some of the others we've seen out of the GNAC, again, if they need it, which we don't expect that they would, is that they figured to have some impressive results against other regionally ranked opponents that have not been the case. Generally, those teams out of the GNAC up for Pool C consideration have gotten that large winning percentage because they haven't played anyone that would have really threatened them. They haven't played the likes of Wisconsin Oshkosh, Illinois Wesleyan,
Yeah.
Tufts, maybe a
Right.
Babson. Now, St. Joseph has, and they've won all those games. So I don't think you can look at it just as, well, they just beat up on the GNAC. Okay, this
Right.
is a team that obviously here has had one of the more impressive non-conference slates out of anyone
Out
in
of
the
anyone.
entire country.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think they already have that Pool C resume, like you said. It just in Pool C wins, you're probably going to need 2 or 3 to be. 3 will set you apart, I think, at the Pool C table. 2 will get you in, and like you said, Babson probably ranked at the end of the season. Oshkosh probably ranked. Tufts probably ranked. Illinois Wesleyan possibly ranked. Yeshiva, I guess I will say possibly ranked for them in that region. And I don't know if I missed one or two, but yeah, that should already give them a WPI who have the game up against. Should they win that game, probably ranked in their region. So I think we've easily surpassed 2 or 3 regionally ranked wins. Their strength of schedule right now is, at the elite level. It's gonna erode quickly through the GNAC, but just based on kind of my hand wavy projections, it looks like they're going to be Pool C playable, especially if we're going to be talking about a 90 something percent winning percentage with even if it's a 525 strength of schedule and a few 2, 3, 4 regionally ranked wins. I don't think they'll have too much of a problem getting in as a Pool C. I think at that point they might not be in a hosting position, that like they might be if they run the complete table here, but I think St. Joseph's looking strong unless they completely change course here.
Yeah, you started to hit on something else I wanted to bring up, and that's with, we're framing this as Pool C consideration, but really this is important for them even if they do win the Pool A,
Oh
because
yeah.
then you start looking across regions and for hosting opportunities, and they look like one of the teams that should be in position for one of those top 4 seeds. But will the criteria end up coming out
Yeah.
looking like a top 4 set of criteria?
I'm actually thinking right now, and I'm just speaking off the cuff here. I'd have to re-look into it. We've had a 5-day break, folks. I haven't thought about D3 hoops too much. More been in Santa Claus land. But I don't know that they'll be in a top 4 consideration, but I think for sure we're talking about a top 16 consideration, which means hosting first and second round pods. Will they go on to host a sectional final? I think that would be up in the air. Uh, a win against WPI would go further to solidify that. Running the table, I think, I always imagine at least a perfect record will help the committee look past a strength of schedule. I'd have to look again at what they're projected to maybe finish at for strength of schedule. But in the 525 range, if that's where it ends up, that wouldn't be an elite number. If it's 540 to 550, I think that would look a little bit better. But maybe with a perfect record, they could be more in that top 4 position as well. I'd have to look in there, but that's definitely still in play, I think, for St. Joseph, depending on what they do. But yeah, there's levels for why this stuff matters, right? So there's win your Pool A, right? Get in. There's are you going to be Pool C viable, right? That's what you want. Then after Pool C, it's are you going to be in a position to host? And then after you're a host, it's well, could you host that next weekend, the sectional weekend? So there's always the next level of resume to continue to build. And unfortunately for the St. Joseph, the GNAC is not going to give them that opportunity. But they've done such a good job of scheduling, and they've done such a good job of execution across that schedule that they've put them ourselves as we stand today in as good a position as anyone to check all of those boxes.
Yeah, and I did pull it up quickly here on your end of season projections. You do have a 528
Okay.
SOS, so it's in the acceptable range. But
Yeah.
then if you add in, an acceptable to good results versus regionally ranked opponents, and then an elite winning percentage,
it could be in that top
there
4 conversation.
it could be. It could be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that wraps up. I think there's a lot of really interesting conference races to watch. I mean, just to go through and see the list, here that didn't even make the top 5: the WIAC, the UAA, the ODAC, and like we said, the Skyline coming in number 1 for what's looking like a 1-bid league. That's
Yeah.
It's as tight as it gets, and it's as important as it gets, because there's no Pool C fallback plan there.
Yeah.
So
those teams are going to want to host the tournament. They're going to want to win the regular seasons, get any advantage you can get, so that way, home court's going to swing some of these tight efficiency margins to who's favored, right? Which court are you playing on could give you that kind of 1 or 2 point home court advantage boost. And you're going to want that because you're going to want to win your Pool A. And really, for any of these conferences, we're looking at the WIAC. We're used to seeing them have, 2 bids easy, 3 bids almost no sweat. I don't know that I see 3 bids out of the WIAC right now from this conference. So 2 looks fine, but depending on what happens, Oshkosh maybe doesn't want to count on that Pool C. They're going to want to win the Pool A. That's, as we say every time, that's really the only safe way in Division III basketball, with 44 automatic bids and only 20 at-large Pool C bids. You got to win your Pool A, and that's the only way you feel good come Selection Monday.
Well, should we look back at last week's picks?
No.
I'm eager to look back at last week's picks.
All right. If you say so. Let's go pull them up. Here we go. Last week's picks were not great. So here they are. St. John's was 7.5 point favorites at Whitworth. Whitworth won that game by 9. Zach and I both get that one. So I will take the points wherever I can get them. Scranton was 9.5 point favorites on a neutral court, I believe, against Washington and Lee. I believed in Scranton, and they lost big. So Washington and Lee gets that one. Zach gets the point. Christopher Newport, the computer, favored them against Elmhurst by 4.5. They won by 8. Zach, you get that one. I was on the side of Elmhurst. And then Geneva at Trinity, Texas. We tried to warn everyone about Trinity. Don't go and play at Trinity in December. At a tournament, they will slaughter you. Geneva was 2-point underdogs. We were both on Trinity. Trinity won that game by 15. And then the D3 Datacast game of the week was Mary Washington -3 versus Stockton. We were both on Mary Washington, and Stockton proved themselves superior in that game. They won by 14, and they covered that. So, Zach, you and I missed that. So here's an update on the picks leaderboard. You went 4-1 last week and slide right back above 500 at 18-17. I was 2-3 and fall back slightly to 23-12, but I still own a full week's advantage over you, 5 games. So you still have some catching up to do.
And shout out to Ryan Scott. He's been playing along with us. He posted his picks as a comment on last week's video. He agreed with me across the board. So Ryan, we did it, buddy. 4-1 week.
That's D3 Hoops lead columnist Ryan Scott to you, Zach. Thanks for playing around. Playing along, Ryan, every week. I enjoy seeing your picks as well. So thank you. And anyone else who's playing along at home, you can feel free to post your picks in the comment section below, as well as Ryan does. I think he's usually one of the first commenters every week with his picks.
He was also looking for that episode Monday. I don't think he went to the lengths to harass any family members. So thank you for that, Ryan. Let this episode be a gift to you, and we will get back on a regular schedule January 9.
He did not harass my father, at least on Twitter, like some other voters have done this past week. So thank you, Ryan, for being kind. Looking up at our picks coming up. So we're going to cover this week as kind of 2 weeks. So the half week through January 8th. So a little bit of a wider slate of games here, but here we go. First on the board, NYU is 11-point favorites by the computer, playing their first real team of the season, Hanover. Zach, who do you have here?
You referenced it earlier. This is easily NYU's toughest opponent of the year, whereas Hanover's played a good schedule. I don't know if you call it great, but it's been at least good.
Mhm.
And more than just playing against good teams, they also have a win over Hope, so they've have some level of achievement over that. 11 points is too big for me here, so I will go with Hanover.
Hanover. I am going to go with NYU. Call me an NYU believer. I have been voting for them this last few weeks, and 11 is a big number. This is a neutral site game, I believe, in Roanoke is maybe where this game is. Um, and so yeah, NYU minus 11. It's a big number. Hanover's a good team, but if NYU's maybe that number 2 team in the UAA, like the computer thinks they might be, then this one has a chance. So let's go. Game number 2 of our slate is Western New England. The computer has them as 1-point underdogs at Nichols. Zach, who do you like?
This one being at Nichols kind of helped sway me a little bit here because it helped make up for what we'll call a conflict in common opponent. Both teams have played Trinity, Connecticut with differing results, but there was also a difference in where that game took place. So I'm willing to chalk that up as uh, just the difference in location, and I will take the home dog. No,
Uh,
sorry, not a home dog, but I'll take Nichols laying the one.
Nichols is a
Yeah.
1-point favorite. But yes, I will also go with Nichols with you. You sounded like you made your pick based on research. I made my pick just on my perception of Nichols is still that they were a preseason fringe top 25 contender. Um, and they haven't been that really to this season yet. But I still look at this margin against Western New England +1. The computer obviously thinks they're very evenly matched teams, but my mind still says, Nichols only won at home. Yeah, they'll cover this. So that's where I went with it. That's how I used the data. This is the Datacast after all, so I went with my gut. Game 3, CCIW tight match. These are the 2 teams I think we highlighted from the CCIW as well. Whoever picked this game was a genius. January 4, North Park, 3.5-point underdogs at Wheaton. Zach, who do you like?
North Park has certainly earned their way into the conversation as a team to watch in the CCIW, as we talked about earlier. But I also know the CCIW has a reputation of being notoriously difficult to play on the road. 3.5 points is not a large number. I still like Wheaton to cover here, so give me the Thunder.
Yeah, I'm voting for Wheaton a little bit higher, kind of in the middle of my poll. I've not yet voted for North Park, although I probably will next time. But a result like this would be one to watch here for me. But I'm going to agree with you. 3.5 at home. Again, my thinking of Wheaton is of a stronger quality than North Park at this point. So I'm expecting them to cover. If they don't, then yeah, that's going to be a wild race, and North Park will definitely be entering my top 25. Game number 4, Rochester at Emory looks like a great one. The computer favors Emory by 6 at home. Zach, who do you like?
Yeah, we gave Emory our props earlier, but I actually see Rochester as the slightly more battle-tested team at this point. So I'm looking for this one to be a little tighter than 6, even if I'm willing to concede Emory as the favorite here. So I will take Rochester plus the 6.
Yeah, I'm taking Rochester +6 as well. I in my mind, these 2 teams are pretty even. I have Rochester slightly higher. I know the computer had Emory a little bit higher, so I have Rochester a little bit higher. This is at Emory, so you give Emory a few points of advantage there, but then I still come out with +6 being too big. So I'm gonna say that the computer is wrong in their assessment here, and I'm gonna say Rochester covers this one on the road. Maybe Emory wins. I don't know, but I think this is going to be a tighter one than 6. And then our D3 Datacast game of the week is going to the ODAC. It's Guilford +7 points at Randolph-Macon. So Zach, the computer sees a 7-point spread here. What do you think?
Well, this one is a big number, but we talked earlier about Randolph-Macon getting things back on track, and they've really put themselves back in the consideration for, it's certainly top 5, if not back in that number 1 mix. they also are knocking down, knocking on the door of like the national record for wins in a row.
Yeah.
I'm not going to bet against Randolph-Macon at Crenshaw Gym, so I'm going to lay the 7.
All right, I'm going to go against you on this one. I'm going to take Guilford to cover the 7 points at least. This is probably maybe a problem of perception for me. My perception of Randolph-Macon is that they have played maybe closer games than they should and haven't been putting teams away. I think that's a perception that has actually not matched reality in recent weeks. I think they've put together some stronger results. But I'm also pretty high on Guilford. So I think this is going to be a close game. I would expect Randolph-Macon to win at home, but I would think maybe by more like 3-5. So I think the 7 being a little bit big here between two of the teams I see being maybe the better 2 or 3 teams in that conference. So I expect a tighter race here. If it's past 7, then maybe we're looking at Randolph-Macon, running through this league a little better than I thought they would be a week or 2 ago. But I'm expecting Guilford to hold it tight. So let's take Guilford plus the 7 for me. Up next is Upset Watch. And I think it's a team we were just talking about, a team that has been on Upset Watch already this year, one time. And that's Randolph-Macon. And this is going to be their January 4 game at Hampton-Sydney. So this was kind of a matchup we had mentioned earlier in the episode. They had played before in the game at Randolph-Macon, and that was a 2-point victory for Randolph-Macon. This, I will admit, feels like a little bit of bandwagon jumping on Hampton-Sydney, considering they recently had the win over, Christopher Newport. But since then, we've had a top 25, and the voters did not elect Hampton-Sydney to that top 25. So they are still getting votes, but they're not a ranked team. So we still have the number 3 ranked team who is receiving multiple number 1 votes in Randolph-Macon against a team who is not ranked. So it feels maybe a little bit like bandwagon jumping, but I think this still meets all of our criteria for Upset Watch. I don't think anyone would be terribly shocked to see Hampton-Sydney get a win like this, especially at home. And I think that is something of a rivalry in that region. I will admit to not being intimately familiar with who the top rivals of Randolph-Macon and Hampton-Sydney are, but if I'm not mistaken, that is a good rivalry. Right now, the computer's looking at this as like a half point to a point expected win for Hampton-Sydney. So definitely right on the edge there. So if you're a Randolph-Macon fan, if you're a D3 Hoops fan in general, if you're maybe a top 25 voter, pay attention to this result. Some might say, that's not really an upset, whatever. Going to be a tight game in a tight conference. But yeah, it's definitely a game that Randolph-Macon could lose.
Yeah, I recall seeing on Twitter after the first matchup when Randolph-Macon got the win, Buzz Anthony took some time out of his day in Germany to tweet about that win, getting another win over Hampton-Sydney.
Yes,
so yes, it is a rivalry there.
It was something of a Macon beats Hampton-Sydney, water is still wet kind of a tweet.
Yep.
So yeah, Buzz like to see the Yellow Jackets winning there. Yeah. So that's Upset Watch, and that one's January 4, so early next week.
Randolph-Macon trying to avoid becoming a 2-time victim of the Upset Watch. It was their game at Mary Washington that put them on the first time, and that did not go so well for them.
Also, who had the bright idea of putting Calvin on Upset Watch last week? That one.
That person needs to be fired.
Yeah. Yeah. So Upset Watch has actually hit every time that it did not involve a NESCAC team, right? So it was correct, Williams, yeah. It was Williams, and it was Middlebury. It was Middlebury.
Middlebury. You're right, against Carnegie Mellon.
Yeah. And that game was close at halftime, and then they kind of ended up winning pretty good. So
it was a good game.
All right. That's it for Upset Watch. Next up is the mailbag. Zach, you got this question?
Yeah, I do. Okay, speaking of harassment, this week's mailbag comes from our friend Bob Quillman. I would like to submit a question for the mailbag segment at D3 Datacast. What did you guys think about the dunk by my guy Eric Dortch that one time? I'll hang up and listen. Thank you. And then Bob was kind enough to include a little photo with his question.
Yeah, I kind of feel like our guy Dan Stout, number 40 down there, does with his hands up, kind of like what's going on here, or Mickey
I was, mo-
DeVries, kind of
yeah,
off
I
the
was
side,
feeling
kind of
more
like.
Mickey DeVries. Yeah,
But yeah, this was one of those games. So this specific game was the Sweet 16. I don't have the year in front of me. Was it 2015? You probably didn't look it up.
I didn't look it up directly. It was around there. Yeah.
But it was a Sweet 16 round. Calvin had won the Wash U pod. I think they had beaten Wittenberg and then Wash U and earned the right to go to Illinois Wesleyan. And the Titans took care of business against Calvin on that day. So unfortunately, our friend Bob uses the opportunity to, make us feel bad personally. So I guess that's how he chose to do it. Um, but yeah, this game happened, and unfortunately, 78-64 was an Illinois Wesleyan victory. It was in 2014. Um, so it was a Sweet 16 loss for Calvin that year. Titans went on to make another Final Four in which they didn't win a national championship, but hey, they hung a banner for it. So that's kind of an at least we tried kind of a banner. So congrats to the Titans on participating in that year's tournament.
We
Good
like to
job.
remind Bob that Kelvin is on a 1-game winning streak at Shirk.
Yeah.
So my lasting memory is Derek DeVries, just one man
Yeah.
wrecking crew through the Titans.
28-10, double double, and that's the last game Calvin and Illinois Wesleyan played at the Shirk. So he had to go back, multiple games to get to this picture. So yeah, that's it.
And as a reminder, our mailbag is always open. If you'd like to submit a question or a comment for us to address in a future episode, you can find us on Twitter at D3Datacast, on Facebook at facebook.com/D3Datacast, or you can leave a message on this very episode. We'll find it, we'll pick
Yeah.
it up, we'll put it in the next episode, and we'll talk about it. It's been a fun segment for us. We thank everyone who's participated so far, except for Bob with this particular entry, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Yep. Yeah. Thanks for all the future submissions to the mailbag, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. We promise we won't take another half week off at any point in the season unless we decide to. But here's to a great conference season. Happy New Year, everyone. Good job, team.